All right. Hello, everyone. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel, and welcome to the I Love Jeet Kune broadcast number 40. And I got to tell you, this one I'm really, really nervous about. This is the one about the Way of the Warrior. This is if you haven't seen it, I suggest you find it on the YouTube and check it out. But I'm pretty sure by now all you guys in the Jeet Kune world have seen this. Way of the Warrior was an 8-part documentary from the British Broadcasting Corporation, from the BBC, 1983, which coincidentally was the year in which I started with Sifu and Asano. So when this came to Barbados, I was really excited to take a look at it. And Sifu Dan is one of maybe 2 or 3 people who appeared more than once in the documentary. He is featured in episode number 5, which is Eskrima, the Filipino way, and then episode 7, Kung Fu, the hard way. So the reason why I'm nervous about this one. All right. Well, okay. Here's why I'm nervous about it. It's because if you could see my laptop screen on my sound, my sound, what do you call it? Soundforge, Sony Soundforge. I've got over 20 audio clips that I'm gonna try to intersperse while I talk to you guys. So this is really something that's a 2-man deal, right? Which is why Carlos should be here, but he's not, right? So if I had my own Jamie Vernon, like Joe Rogan does, or if I had my own, or not gay Jared, like Steven Crowder used to have, right? Then they would be able to play the clip. So I'm gonna give it my best shot, and hopefully I don't mess this up. You guys may have heard me say on broadcast number 36 that my Jeet Kune senior, Cass Magda, he was the one who suggested to me that I talk about Sifu Dan's let's call it historical lectures on Jeet Kune, the way that Sifu Dan talked about Jeet Kune in the 70s and the 80s. So I thought we'd try something a little bit different, and I'll break down what was shown on the documentary, right? So from the start, I do have to declare that there's no copyright infringement intended here, since I do not own the rights to any of the video portions or any of the audio portions of the BBC documentary. I am merely making fair use of it in order to comment on what is being shown in that program. So the first clip that I'll play for you is a segue from the section on Wing Chun, right? So this is episode 7, Kung Fu the Hard Way. So they show the Hung Gar guy in Hong Kong. Then they show Simon Lau in Wing Chun in London, and then they segue into the Inasano portion. Okay, so here it goes. First audio clip. Let me. I hope this works. It'll be fun. So Glenn or somebody, Bo Jackson or somebody, tell me if you can hear this stuff okay.
Wing Chun was the Kung Fu style that Bruce Lee started to learn when he was 13. He was in Hong Kong then. His full development as a master was after he moved to California. Okay,
so if you got that, right, it says Wing Chun was the first, there was a Kung Fu system that Bruce Lee practiced when, okay, thanks Sifu Nick. I was hoping you would be on Sifu Nick, because I know that when I finish this broadcast, you will send me a message. Thanks guys, I appreciate it. Sifu Nick will send me a message and he'll go, oh, you know, there is this piece of technology that you could have used which would have made it much easier for you. So I'm looking forward to that, right? Anyhow, so what you heard was the sound of two Wing Chun students from thanks Glenn, from Simon Lau's Kung Fu school, and what they were doing was, it wasn't quite it was okay. Bo Jackson, I'll see what I can do. So they were doing kind of like hand sparring out of the Bong Sao Lap Sao drill, right? But what it said was what it gave rise to was, as the narrator said, Bruce Lee's full development of a master was when he moved to California. And I don't think that assumption is questioned by anybody, that Bruce Lee's full evolution came about during the LA Chinatown series. So clip number 2. Let's see if this works.
It was in Los Angeles that he began his film career, and at the same time worked out his theories about the fighting arts.
Right, you heard that? It was in Los Angeles that he began his film career and worked out his theories on the fighting arts, right? That is backed up by what the narrator says next.
He taught many people, but he shared his deepest thoughts with very few. One man who worked closely with him still teaches Bruce Lee's approach to fighting in his Los Angeles gymnasium.
Okay, so he says he taught many people, but he shared his deepest secrets with only a few people, right? Which is how they introduce Sifu and Asano. So what I was telling you is that in the Jeet Kune commentaries book on page 52, what you can read is where it's a pretty well known. We've talked about it before, where Bruce Lee writes, both Taki and James are more steeped in the Chinese system, a reference to Wing Chun, right? Because they met me at an earlier stage of my development, which is before Los Angeles. And consequently, whenever I see the two of them, I try to liberate them from one way to walk the pathless path. Dan, a dedicated professional, met me during the midst of my evolution, though he has less training than Taki or James, right? So that's what they're making a reference to there, right? Okay, so as I said, he taught many people, but he shared his deepest thoughts with very few, right? So now listen to this. This is pretty cool.
Bruce Lee called his system Jeet Kune, the way of the intersecting fist. He made Dan Inosanto think again about all that he had been taught about the fighting arts.
Right? So he made Dan Inosanto think again about everything he had been taught about the fighting arts. Right? Then what they show is a throwback, I call it a throwback to the old days of Kali Academy, when you had to be voted into the Jeet Kune class, right? So if you look at the page 152 of the Art and Philosophy book, where it says currently our program consists of 10 groups from novice to expert and a single Jeet Kune class that meets behind closed doors on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. New members are only admitted by unanimous consent of the JKD board, right? So I think that's reflected in this clip.
Dan Inosanto doesn't teach Bruce Lee's revolutionary theories to everybody. What he looks for in a student is quick thinking and an openness, a flexibility of mind.
Right? You know what? I think I'll play that again, because that's really important.
Dan Inosanto doesn't teach Bruce Lee's revolutionary theories to everybody. What he looks for in a student is quick thinking and an openness, a flexibility of mind.
Quick thinking, an openness, a flexibility of mind, right? That's what were the criteria for being chosen or accepted into the old Jeet Kune class back at the Kali Academy, right? Okay, so now we move on to, because this documentary was filmed in the 1980s, and even then it was giving us a historical look, because we'd had maybe 15 years or so of Jeet Kune. So the narrator talks about an element of Jeet Kune that in 1967, let's say, at the second internationals, astounded people who saw the demonstration between Sijo Bruce and Sibak Taki and Sifu Dan, right? So listen to this one.
Although Jeet Kune is based on Kung Fu, it uses many other techniques as well. It even incorporates Western boxing into the Eastern fighting arts.
Right, so they're talking about the incorporation of Western boxing into the Eastern fighting arts. And so I've heard a story that at that 67 internationals, you know, people ask Bruce Lee, well, you know, what is this thing that you're doing? Because it looks like kicking, but then you start punching like if you're a boxer. So what style is this? And you guys have heard me say this before, right? He said, well, it's no style. And they said, well, how can it be no style? And he said, because it's all styles. And they said, well, how can it be all styles? And he said, because it's no styles, right? So so that clip, what you hear is they show a couple of seconds of Chris Kent and Cass Magda on the focus mitts. I think Chris is feeding Cass. But then they also show another few seconds of two guys who I hope one day I can get them on the Jeet Kune Do Dialogues show. It's a guy named Blaze Lung and a guy named Jeff Chun. Right? So here's what they go on to say about the training.
The students are taught to fight ferociously, and yet to be sensitive to their opponent. They must feel out his technique and respond to the energy of his attacks, taking it over and using it against him.
Right? So the students are taught to fight ferociously and to be sensitive to the energy of the opponent, take that energy and reverse it and use it against him. That was something that I made use of in trying to break down in detail for people who were interested in what I teach here in Miami. And so I used a portion of this documentary and talked about in Junfan kickboxing, the idea, and my student Glenn is on, so he knows what I'm talking about. The idea is to acquire a swift kick and a couple of fast hands and to learn to fight ferociously, right? Because sometimes a swift kick and a couple of fast hands can do the job for you, but more on that a little bit later, right? And then we hear a little, and then it's also about mindset, right? Learning to fight ferociously, right? Then there's, what's the next part? The next part is a vintage description of Bruce Lee's thoughts on what constitutes Jeet Kune Do.
Bruce Lee taught that the response to attack can be to use a technique from any fighting system in the world.
Right? Bruce Lee taught that the response to any attack could be to use a technique from any fighting system in the world. Right? So that's a vintage description. And then we go into vintage Inasano, let's call it.
It's a combination of East and West, and there's neither Japanese or Chinese or Okinawan or Korean or Filipino or Indonesian, or which he also borrowed from Francaise-Savate quite heavily also. See?
Right. So I consider that to be vintage Inasano because he's having like a stream of consciousness, and so he's calling out the countries, right, the cultures that which all the stuff that's going on at the Kali Academy comes from. And then I suspect that he put in the part about Savate because this might have been around the time that Salem Asli had shown up, right? So let me play that one for you one more time.
It's a combination of East and West, and there's neither Japanese or Chinese or Okinawan or Korean or Filipino or Indonesian, or which he also borrowed from Francaise-Savate quite heavily also. See?
Okay, so then he gives kind of a succinct explanation of a way of looking at Jeet Kune Do in terms of Bruce Lee's ideas.
So it's just a combination that somebody had something to offer and he wanted to blend it into what worked for him. So Jeet Kune Do, Bruce's art, is basically what works for that individual. Right?
That's another one I think is worthy of a repeat.
So it's just a combination that somebody had something to offer and he wanted to blend it into what worked for him. So Jeet Kune Do, Bruce's art, is basically what works for that individual.
Right? So Jeet Kune Do is basically what works for that individual, right? You get it? So you do, us followers in Jeet Kune Do, we do what Bruce Lee did, which is to find out what works for you as an individual, right? And if you need help, then you follow what I call the 4 tenets of Jeet Kune Do.
And it still goes back to what we're talking about: research your own experience, absorb what is useful, and reject what is useless, and add specifically what is your own creation.
Right? So, research your own experience, absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, add specifically what is your own. All right? Okay, so now, let's see. So now we go into another aspect of what made Jeet Kune Do training different from its other martial art counterparts by talking about Bruce Lee's eschewal of a martial arts staple, the form or the kata.
Bruce never taught us forms, and we're probably the only non-classical Kung Fu style that has never been taught forms. And according to Bruce, if you taught forms, it wouldn't be the mechanics. Okay, if you notice a lot of Chinese sets, they'll go like this, right? And they'll go like this, or they'll go like this, and they'll go like this, and then they'll do it with the left hand. See, Bruce was against forms because you don't know what it's for. Why don't I just practice it like this? And break, then hit the groin and hit the face and hit, rather than practice it like this and not know what the meaning is for.
Okay, so that one was a little bit long, but the whole idea is why not practice the technique, right, rather than doing it in the air, get to the realistic application of it, which is why I think that so, this is way back, this is 30-something years ago, a call for a more realistic approach to martial art training. So that's why I find it funny that there's a discussion somewhat nowadays about how Jeet Kune is no longer functional, when real Jeet Kune people have continued to train only for what works and against what works, right? So this idea that somehow real Jeet Kune has gone the route of the dodo bird or something, I find it interesting, right? Now, I don't know if Sifu Dan knew what was going to precede his portion, right? Because then when he goes into actual like physical demonstration, they decide to use reference point trapping.
The basics over here is that you have a front barrier and you have a rear barrier. So once the kicking range has been closed, and it usually is closed very quickly, we trap the first barrier. This is referred to as Boxe.
Right, so there's a couple of interesting things in there, right? He talks about having a front barrier and a rear barrier, and the fact that you encounter these barriers once you've come through the kicking range. And then he makes a subtle note that the kicking range is usually closed quite quickly, right? Which is kind of like a throwaway statement for him, but something of huge value and huge importance, right? Remember what Bert Richardson said? Because Bert is one who points this out all the time. The Inasano will show you all this stuff, and then he'll go, but yeah, I'd probably just hit him in the hand, right? So you'll see that repeated a little bit. As a matter of fact, I think I did repeat it. Let me see.
Usually it's closed very quickly.
Yeah, right? You hear it?
The kicking range has been closed, and it usually is closed very quickly.
The kicking range has been closed, and it usually is closed very quickly, right? So going back to what was said previously about reading the opponent's energy, this is what Sifu Dan says now.
Now, depending on his energy, he will come out with maybe as many as 12 different types of techniques, depending on how much force he is given.
Right, so again, we're talking about the trapping. So he says, depending on the energy of the opponent, right, then the person who's doing the trapping could come out with as many as 12, which I think is an interesting thing that he says that, right? Could come out with as many as 12 different techniques based on the energy that that he receives, right? And then they'll show this.
Okay, Boxe.
Hang on, let me get it right.
Boxe.
Yeah.
Okay, this is called Lapsao Guachoi. Okay, Guachoi. Okay, from the position. Okay, this is what we refer to as trapping hands. Okay, now if the energy is different, this is what we refer to as a double Boxe out. Okay. So
they show trapping hands, and they show what I remember being taught as trapping basic number 1, which is Paksao, Lapsao, Bongsao, Guachoi, right? And then also trapping basic number 2, which is the double Paksao, right? So then Inasano starts, he starts getting into the flow of things.
Okay, when you do this, it's your choice. He can go into a bent elbow lock, which is right here. He can, at his choice, go into a straight elbow lock, which is straight down like this. He can, at his choice, even go into a choke, depending what he so desires, okay?
Right, so he shows 3 grappling techniques that could come out of that basic double Paksao position or Bongsao Lapsao position, right? So the reason why I was commenting about the 12 things that he said, I had been introduced to the idea of coming up with 12 different things from a reference point in Filipino Kali. I had not yet been introduced to that idea in Jun Fan, right? Neither in the kickboxing or in the trapping. So I've always wondered what influenced what, which came first, right? This idea of 12 different techniques from a reference point. So if anybody out there knows the answer to that, whether it was in the Kali first or in the Jun Fan, be sure to to let me know, right? So he shows, I pushed the wrong button. He shows, shoot. I was afraid that was going to happen. Let's see. Can I find it? No, I just lost one of the clips. But what he was talking about was, he showed all these grappling finishes from that position, but then he says that if you're not so much into the grappling, he doesn't say that. He just shows that you can revert to the boxing, right? And then he goes on, because I don't want this to go on too long, right? So he goes on, and then he shows everything. Let me see, which one is it? Because he's kind of coming into the home stretch. So he shows how all that trapping stuff can be done instead of from the high reference point. You can do it all from the low reference point, what we call pinchoi position, right? And then coming into the home stretch, he says something really important, but albeit subtle. Let's see. I hope I didn't mess up this one.
But this is the basis of it. See, there's not a lot of technique because the technique goes by his sensitivity. Okay, let's say he does a Boxe from this position here, and the hand is grabbed. Okay, he can wrist lock that arm, and he goes down. Okay.
Right. So right at the beginning of that, he says there's not a whole lot of technique.
This is the basis of it. See, there's not a lot of technique because the technique goes by his sensitivity. Okay, let's say he does.
Right. So he says the technique goes by his sensitivity, which I think is another way of saying, where Bruce Lee talks about. There's two things that are going on here, right? One, it's in on page 127, I think it is. Page 127 of the philosophy book, where there's a section called "The Art of Jeet Kune is Simply to Simplify," right? So Sifu Dan says there's not a whole lot of technique because technique is based on the sensitivity. That's akin to what Bruce Lee says about my technique is a result of your technique, right? And then he shows a simple counter to the opponent's attempt to count to you, right? So then it calls to mind also back in the commentaries book, page 87, where under a section called the role of techniques, Bruce Lee says that though they play an important role, right, in the early stages, the technique should not be too complex, mechanical, or restrictive. So then Sifu Dan talks about no limitation.
If you limit yourself to a particular style, then you have to solve it. Because this is the foundation that Bruce taught us. That it doesn't matter what art and where you take it from, you just flow accordingly to the structure of your body. So it doesn't have to be. And I think that's where the great fall in the world is. They think it's a Chinese. It is a Kung Fu style because its roots are found, 50% is found in the Wing Chun system. But he went out of it.
Okay, so that's a fairly long clip, but he talks about if you limit yourself to one way of doing things, then you're going to have to hope that one way of doing things can solve all the problems or all the issues that come your way, right? And then he talks about it being a Chinese system because a percentage of it is based in the Wing Chun, but then that he went beyond the Wing Chun. Again, no limitation as limitation, and then using no way as way, right? So he starts to wind down, and he talked by distinguishing between what Bruce Lee might be known for in the movies.
So all this high kicking and flashy kicking is usually out. In all the confrontations that I've seen Bruce, in actual confrontation, I've never seen him do any of this at all, unless he's just playing around with the man. Okay?
Right. So he talks about the flash kicking and the high kicking. That stuff was reserved for the movies and TV, but that in actual real confrontations, he never saw Bruce Lee do anything like that unless he was just kind of messing around with the guy. Right? So he goes on to differentiate between what we call theatrical JKD and functional or practical JKD.
For an example, right? This here, if he grabs my hand from Bruce, we just will stop. That's good enough. But you see, as Bruce said, what is spectacular for a movie is not usually practical for the street. And what is practical for the street is very dull for demonstration.
Right? So what's practical for the street is very dull for demonstration. What is spectacular for the movies, right, would not work in the street. So the distinguishing between functional JKD and practical JKD, right? So then absolutely finally, he talks about the value, right? Well, I'll just play it for you.
This is where where Bruce said he was violently against. Bruce said that you had to have something between East and West. And I think in the Orient, they tend to be over-secretive, over-flowery sometimes, and hiding a lot, see? If you're secure in your knowledge, you don't have to hide it. Why hide it? You can just bring it out.
Okay, I had to play a little bit of the Filipino drum for you, right? But that's what he says. He says Bruce Lee was violently opposed to the idea of not sharing, right? That you had to have something, a bridge between East and West. And that I don't think it's so much, I don't think it's this way so much today. But in the old days, you know, in the Orient, they did hide things from you and not show you the real art and whatever. But I think the world is a much smaller place now. But what he says is that if you're secure in your knowledge, you don't have to hide it. Why hide it? You can just bring it out, which I think that's a great way to end. All right, so I hope you guys got a kick out of that. I think I only messed up on one audio clip, right? So that's it for today. So feel free, as always, to share, like, comment, ask me questions. I'll go back through the comments and answer anything after I post the video. Remember to sign up for notifications both on Facebook and the YouTube for when I go live, and look for both the broadcast and the Jeet Kune dialogues. They both have YouTube channels assigned to them now, I'm pretty sure. Just do a search for them, you should be able to find them. The Constant Heads Up, Volume 1 of the I Love Jeet Kune Quick Skill Series, available at ilovejeetkundo.com. Coming up this Friday, which will be the 24th, August 24th, Jeet Kune Dialogues with Andy Kimura, the son of Bruce Lee's lieutenant in Seattle, Taki Kimura. So that'll be quite historical. That's this Friday, 24th at 3 p.m. And I'm also toying with the idea of adding a second Jeet Kune Dialogues program on Monday evenings. So next Monday, which is the 26th, we'll be on with none other, my nickname for him is Mr. Diana Inosano, also known as Ron Balicki, right? So I'll be talking to Ron on next Monday, so check in for that. Mr. Wells, there we go, right? Today is a green day, and I think that's it, right? So we'll see you back here next week for another issue of the I Love Jeet Kune broadcast. Everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.